Now we are going to switch gears a little bit and move to our international keynote for this morning. We've got Dr. Timothy Renick, who is going to speak to us about the Georgia State model using AI and analytics to transform outcomes for underserved students. I believe that Tim is actually online with us already, but while we are getting him live streamed in, I'm going to introduce Tim. So Tim is named one of Fortune World's 50 Greatest Leaders and is the founding executive director of the National Institute for Student Success and professor at Georgia State University. From 2008 to 2020, he led student success efforts that improved graduation rates by 70% and eliminated equity gaps by race, ethnicity, and income. He has testified before the US Senate and House, spoken at the White House, and been featured by major media outlets. He has received numerous honors, including the McGraw Prize in Higher Education and the Award for National Leadership in Student Success Innovation. His institution has earned the US Department of Education's Trailblazer Award, and his work was chronicled in Won't Lose This Dream by Andrew Gumbel. Is Tim live with us already?
I am here, if you can hear me.
Hello, Tim.
Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I think I speak on behalf of the room when we say good morning and good evening. I think it is for you over in your neck of the woods.
That is correct.
Thank you very much for joining us. I've just introduced you, and I should introduce myself. I'm Ewen, the Director of the Research and Policy Program at ACSES, and I have here a room full of people, and with another few hundred online, who are all eagerly waiting to hear from you.
Great. Well, I'm honored to be with you this morning. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Tim Renick. I have a story to tell this morning about an institution that may be like yours in some ways, that has struggled over the years with equity issues, but found some paths forward that have proven highly effective. So I hope in telling the story, I can also offer some practical advice that will be useful in your own context and setting. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully you can see my slides. And there is hopefully the title page. So let me start by saying a little bit about my home institution in the United States. Georgia State University is a large urban university with about 53,000 students in Atlanta, Georgia. The reality is, until recently, we were not very well known, and there was not much to distinguish us, at least in a positive sense. Our greatest claim to fame historically is our geography. We have the very uncommon distinction of having our main campus in downtown Atlanta bisected by a national historic district. The Martin Luther King district cuts the Georgia State campus in half. My office is on Auburn Avenue, about 4 blocks away from that brick building at the bottom of the screen. That's Ebenezer Baptist Church, where the Reverend King and his father before him were head pastors. His childhood home, his gravesite are located right there within walking distance of Georgia State. So we're living and working every day in this geography that is infused with historical significance. But for much of our history, Georgia State University did not live up to that legacy. I pulled these photos from the Georgia State Photo Archive. This is what Georgia State looked like when the Reverend King was doing his Nobel Peace Prize winning civil rights work. We were segregated, whites only, sad irony of this great world civil rights leader preaching a couple blocks away from this institution that's the embodiment of what he's fighting against. But much more recently than the 1960s, Georgia State was still grossly underperforming, especially for our students of color, our underserved populations. These were our graduation rates as of about 15 to 20 years ago. They hovered around 30%. Only about 30% of our students were graduating on time. And we were a national example of equity gaps, where white students outperformed our Black and Hispanic students, which are our 2 largest minoritized groups at Georgia State.
Sorry, Tim. It's Ewen here again. Sorry, we have a technical issue and we can't actually see your slides. Are you sharing them?
I am. Yes, I can stop sharing and try again.
Yes, please. Any advice from the AV team?
Okay, is that any better?
Yes, that's great. Thank you very much, Tim. And sorry for the interruption. You've got a round of applause from the crowd here. I'm not sure whether you can hear it, but sorry for the interruption and please proceed.
Yeah, I apologize then. So I'll go through these next slides quickly because you've already heard the voiceover. This is a shot of Georgia State University, a very urban campus. As I pointed out, our historical claim to fame is having our main campus bisected by the Martin Luther King Historical District in the US. We live and work very close to where the Reverend King preached and lived his childhood home and so forth. And yet our campus was segregated throughout the period where the Reverend King was doing his civil rights work. And then far after the Reverend King's death, we were still grossly underperforming, especially for our minoritized populations at Georgia State. Our largest groups are our Black and Hispanic students. So these were our graduation rates, at least our on-time graduation rates, as of about 20 years ago. And what happened in the interim would not suggest that Georgia State would be the site of a turnaround when it came to equity issues. For one thing, we were going through significant demographic changes. I'm a professor at Georgia State. When I arrived, we were a majority white institution. 75% of our students self-identified as white. We became a minority serving institution about 15 years ago. And every year we just get more and more diverse to the point now where 80% of our students self-identify as non-white. That, as you know, typically doesn't correlate to significantly improved graduation rates, nor does this slide. The other demographic change we've gone through is that our students have gotten less well-resourced financially. So before the last recession, under a third of our students qualified by US federal standards as low-income students. Now it's up to 60% or just under that. This fall semester at Georgia State, we're enrolling over 29,000 low-income students by federal standard. It's not going to be business as usual. It's also not the opportunity to do something we love to do in higher education, which is if you've got a challenge, let's create a specialized program. We'll create a program for our Black students, a program for our first-gen students, and so forth. That may work in some circumstances, but what I can say to you with great assurance is when you enroll 29,000 low-income students, you don't create a program for them. You change the way the institution operates at its core systematically for all of its students. And that's going to be the recurring theme in my comments to you this morning, thinking about the path to more equitable outcomes being in part by getting the big issues right, making your systems that touch all students more effective. I'll give some examples in just a second. Before I get to them, I want to point out that over the time period I'm discussing this morning, Georgia State has not been getting more selective in our admissions processes, and we have been getting budget cuts, so we have fewer dollars, at least state appropriations, to do our work. But under these circumstances, it's really easy to point fingers. You know, let's plan to improve our graduation rates and our close our equity gaps when we have more resources from the state, when we can recruit better prepared students academically. What Georgia State did about 12, 13 years ago was take a very different path. Rather than looking outward and saying, wouldn't it be nice to have more resources or better prepared students, we looked internally and asked seriously and publicly the question, are we the problem? If 7 out of 10 students were coming to Georgia State and many of them were dropping out with debt and nothing to show for it, whose fault is it? Yes, it'd be nice to have more money. Yes, it'd be nice to have students who came in academically stronger. But there must be some things we were doing that were contributing to the attrition of so many of our students. And so we really focused on those issues. We used data in order to analyze our own processes and systems to identify instances where we could improve, because if we could find things that we were doing less than effectively, these were opportunities for positive change. These were changes we had some control over, unlike our appropriations, our budget, the nature of the students we were admitting. So I'm going to share with you this morning very quickly just 3 examples of how this methodology works. I hope it applies to your context as well. The specific examples may not, but I am quite sure that this approach can be useful in many circumstances, and I'll explain why I'm sure of this in my very closing part of my comments. So the first example starts with this data point that 10, 12 years ago, 19% of our confirmed incoming university class every year never showed up. They were subject to what we call in the States summer melt. They applied, got into Georgia State, confirmed their intent to enroll, but they just never matriculated at Georgia State. So we did a data analysis. We tried to understand who these students were and why they were not completing the matriculation process. We tracked all the students who had confirmed their intent to enroll at Georgia State for a full year. And what we found is for the students who didn't end up matriculating, they had a very specific profile. They were mostly students from minority backgrounds. They were mostly low-income students. They were good candidates for university, but something was happening to them that was preventing them from making that last step and actually joining us as university students and taking, pursuing their academic degrees. We wanted to explore whether they had changed their mind, they'd maybe gone someplace else, but we found the vast majority of these students just melted out of attending university entirely. It's not that they went someplace else, they just didn't go to university at all. So what did link these students together? What we found at Georgia State, and I bet it's true at your university as well, is that we were part of the problem. What linked these students together was not that they changed their mind, but they failed to navigate some of the bureaucratic processes that students need to complete in order to be ready for the first day of university. Transcripts, financial aid forms, deposits, registration for classes, coming for orientation. Each of the students who failed to matriculate was held up by one or the other of these processes. So we used the same data approach to try to explore a different way of onboarding our new students to the university, especially because we were seeing that our processes disproportionately impacted low-income students, first in their family to attend university students, and minoritized populations. What did we do? Two things. The first thing we did is create a portal that takes the students through all those administrative tasks even before they arrive on campus. It's color-coded, so when they complete a task, changes color. There are resources on the page. I'll tell you, the biggest advantage we had from creating this portal is that we began to collect much better data about what was the problem that individual students were facing. So we used to know a student was engaged and then we stopped hearing from them. Now with this portal, we know this specific student was engaged until we asked for their immunization records, and then we stopped hearing from them. So we can reach out with much more specific help. We see you may be having some problems with your immunization records. In fact, collecting data from this portal over several years changed fundamental functions at Georgia State. We now contract with a mobile health clinic. It parks outside all of our orientations and provides free immunizations to students. Only costs about $60 US for each immunization. So it's the kind of prudent thing to do from a financial perspective because it helps these students actually make it to the first day of classes. But it's also the morally right thing to do. These low-income first-gen students often don't have the resources to solve the issue if you send them home and say, well, don't come back until you've been immunized for these three diseases. The other thing we did, and this has gotten more attention nationally in the US, is we became one of the first schools in the US to really scale the use of AI. We created an AI coach. We developed a knowledge base of initially over 2,000 answers to commonly asked questions by students. We used AI to allow this texting platform to answer questions really quickly. The AI, when a question comes in, goes into the knowledge base, pulls out the right request, typically within 4 or 5 seconds. And the students can get help 24/7 amidst even their work schedule, their family obligations, and so forth that help them navigate some of these administrative tasks. When we launched in the summer of 2016, we thought maybe we would have 6,000, 8,000 questions answered by this new tool. That first term, we had it live. In the 3 to 4 months leading up to the start of our new academic year in 2016, we had over 180,000 questions answered. What was interesting is the use of the chatbot, this tool, was heavier at 1 in the morning than it was at 9 in the morning, an indictment of our standard business practices, but also indication that we were reaching students we hadn't reached before. In the past, if a student was working and trying to get their financial aid documents in or accomplish other administrative tasks, we were closed by the time they got off work. Now we have a tool that is able to meet these students 24/7. We did focus groups with these students. A number of students told us that they wouldn't have asked questions to a real person that they felt comfortable asking this AI tool. And did it help? We've been able to reduce what we call summer melt, the number of confirmed students who failed to enroll, by 50%. From 19% this most recent year is down to 9%. And because it works so well for our incoming students, we now use it with all our students from the day they matriculate at Georgia State to the day they graduate. It's helping them constantly navigate bureaucracy on campus. And we've run randomized control trials showing not only that it works and helps getting students registered, getting them the help they need, but it disproportionately helps our students from underserved populations. But more recently, we're using it in some of our modules or our courses with high non-pass rates. So we work with the instructors, so the same AI tool that is able to answer students' questions on their smartphone about immunizations and financial aid can answer questions about chemistry or microeconomics or government. And what we found in these studies is that the students do significantly better, almost a full letter grade better. And the biggest gains are again enjoyed by students from underserved backgrounds, our first generation students and our low income students. The second example I'm going to share begins with this data point, that we had significant problems with students who were academically qualified dropping out of Georgia State for financial reasons. Every semester, about 1,000 students who were qualified and registered for classes failed to come up with the tuition and fees, the funds they needed to pay for their education, and so they couldn't persist and continue. So we did a long-term study. We looked at 75,000 Georgia State students over an 8-year period and asked a really simple question. If a student stops out for financial reasons for even a single semester, how does that impact their chances of getting their degree, of actually graduating and completing a post-secondary degree? The results were very sobering. If a student stops out for even a single semester, even though they intend to come back and complete their degree, their graduation rates go down by 54 percentage points, from over 70% to down to about 20%. So we looked more closely at these students who are stopping out for financial reasons. We know we didn't have the resources to pay for all of their expenses, but we did find that there was a subset of the students we could help. There was a subset who owed not a lot of money to the university and were close to graduating, only needed to stay enrolled for another semester or two. And we began a microgrant, Scott, where the students don't have to apply at all. We're using data analytics to identify students who are good academic risk, close to graduating, but running out of aid from their scholarship, loans and so forth, and need a little boost. The average grant has been only $900, but we've given 22,000 of these grants out over the last decade. And what's happened to these students? Well, they don't stop out for a semester because we keep them enrolled by giving them these grants, and they end up graduating at the same rates as the students who are not at financial risk in the first instance. In fact, 85% of the students who receive one of these microgrants go on to graduate within an academic year. And because they're graduating without stopping out, they're graduating more efficiently and with less debt at the time they complete their degrees. The third and final example I'll give starts with this sobering data point, that about 15 years ago, Georgia State was losing about 6,000 students a year to attrition. These were not the students we were just talking about. Those were students who were registered and we were dropping them or holding up their registration because they couldn't pay their bills. This is a larger group who are eligible to re-enroll at Georgia State, but just didn't return, right? They didn't come back for a subsequent semester. So we did a big data project. We used 10 years of data, 140,000 student records from Georgia State, trying to answer a simple question. Are there any early predictors of which students will eventually stop out and not complete their degrees? We did a big data project. We thought we'd find a couple dozen statistically significant predictors of students who may stop out of the university in subsequent terms. We found 800. And for 13 years, we've been tracking every Georgia State student every single night for every one of these risk factors. A lot of these risk factors are very intuitive. This is the map, as we call it, for completing a chemistry degree at Georgia State. It's complicated. And we used to allow the students on their own devices to take and register for the courses they need in the order they need to take them. Now we're monitoring registration records. Before the start of every semester, if a student is not in the right course, they'll get an intervention so we can get them in the right course. We're looking at more nuanced, though, predictive analytics. We found, for instance, in our big data that there are some toxic combinations of courses. If a student takes biochemistry and calculus in the same semester, their chances of passing both courses go down by about 20%, compared to if they take one course and then the other in successive semesters. So now we alert a student if they sign up for this toxic combination and say, maybe you want to reconsider and take one of these courses this semester and the second course next semester. We found early warning signs in early grades of students who might be at risk. You might think if a student passes a course that they're in good position to succeed. But what we found is that the first grade that a student gets in their academic program is highly predictive of their chances of graduating on time. And even students who get C grades, so they're passing grades, although not high passing grades, are at great risk of intervene with those students immediately. If they're a student who's in political science, we may look at their papers and exams and see if they need writing or reading help before they take other courses. Maybe they've got some personal issues or financial issues, but we're going to try to diagnose those issues now rather than waiting. And we're using electronic footprints of our students to see, to track levels of engagement. So are the students logging on to the learning management platform or even the Wi-Fi on campus so that we can see at scale across 50,000 students which students are not actively engaged. The trick is doing this at scale. Over the last 12 months at Georgia State, we've had over 100,000 proactive interventions with students where we reached out to them because of alerts that we found in this system. We didn't correct all 100,000 problems, but I can say, you know, before we launched this platform, these were 100,000 issues that were going undiagnosed by Georgia State. And does this approach make a difference? As soon as we launched in 2012, we saw a significant improvement in progression rates and the percent of students who are staying enrolled from year to year. We've surprised our faculty because some feared that using predictive analytics to advise students would lead students to end up in the easiest majors at Georgia State. Just the opposite has happened, that we've seen a flowering of students completing STEM degrees. We're up over 100% in STEM degrees awarded over the last decade, even as our enrollment grew by about 35%. And the biggest gains have been for, again, students from our underserved backgrounds. It's not because we have more Black and Hispanic students declaring STEM majors. We have fewer of them trying these majors and then wiping out after a semester because we're intervening as early as the first couple weeks of the semester if something is amiss, getting them the support they need to succeed. And what we've been able to show in our data, and we just completed a 6-year randomized control trial, is the move to this database predictive analytics and advising has helped us improve our graduation rates overall by 7 percentage points. But for our Black students, just as one example of an underserved group, the gain is much better. Not because the programs target Black students because they're Black, but because the Black students overall trigger more of these alerts, and we've been responding to them systematically. One other bonus to this approach that I'm describing is it's helped students progress more efficiently. So these are the number of credit hours one of our degree recipients has at the time they're walking across the stage and getting their diploma. And we basically cut a full semester off the time to degree over the last 10 years. The biggest impact of that is for our low-income students, because what we've been able to show is it's getting less expensive to complete a degree at Georgia State. This means it's more affordable for more of our low-income students to actually reach the point of graduating. The last thing I want to do in my final couple minutes here is talk about the collective impact. So what happens when you begin to scale this a data approach, especially with regard to equity issues? Well, one thing it did is change the reputation of Georgia State. We got a lot of attention. This was campus a few years ago. You may recognize the gentleman on the right, Bill Gates, went out of his way. He invited himself to campus because he wanted to learn more about our use of technology to help low-income and low-income students. So that's a positive change for a campus that has a very checkered moral past. The other big change that maybe you may not think of immediately is it's put the university on much better financial footing. So every 1% we improve our progression rates, the percent of students who we hold on to from term to term. It's worth about $3.3 million a year in additional tuition revenues that the university collects. We didn't, over the time I'm describing to you this morning, improve our rates by 1 point. We've improved them by 25 percentage points. So we're talking about $80 million or so of additional revenue. It's put the university on much stronger fiscal footing. But my academic field, I'm a professor of religious studies, is more focused on this slide, that there's a moral component to this work. And despite the fact that over the last decade, we've doubled the number of low-income and first-gen students we enroll at Georgia State, we're graduating 3,500 more students every year, an 84% increase. And look where the biggest gains have come from. We're up 84% overall, but for our Black, our low-income, and Hispanic students, the gains are much higher than that. Again, not because we've targeted a lot of programs by race, ethnicity, or income level, but when you get the big issues right, when you help students navigate registration and enrollment and advising and these basic financial aid issues and so forth, the students who benefit the most will be your most vulnerable students. And that leads to the change in our graduation rates. As I say, they haven't improved modestly. They've improved exponentially for some of our populations. For our Black and Hispanic students, they've more than doubled over this time period. And because they've disproportionately increased for our Black, Hispanic, and low-income students, Georgia State has had 7 years in a row where our Black, Hispanic, and low-income students have graduated at or above the rate of the student body overall. So when it comes to graduation rates, there are no longer equity gaps at Georgia State based on race, ethnicity, and income level. And this institution in the shadow of the Martin Luther King district that was segregated into the 1960s and still grossly underperforming for our students of color as recently as a decade ago, now, and it's been for 8 years in a row, confers more undergraduate degrees to Black students than any other college or university in the United States. And isn't that a more fitting tribute to the Martin Luther King district and the native son of Atlanta? The very last thing I want to say is just a little hope about how what works at Georgia State can work at your institution. I am now executive director of the National Institute for Student Success, where we're working on sharing these same sorts of approaches, the 3 examples I gave this morning, and then a number of other ones with other campuses. We're working with 140 partner institutions, most of them in the US, but we are working with institutions in South Africa and elsewhere. And what we are seeing in just the first 3 years of delivering our consulting support is that the institutions we're working with are improving their retention rates at almost 3 times the national average in the US. They're improving their graduation rates at 2.5 times the national average in the US. But to end on the point of equity, what we're seeing across all of these campuses that are working with the NIST are the same kind of phenomena I described to you at Georgia State. All students are doing better. So over the last couple of years, nationally, retention rates have gone up across the US by about 1.5 points, but white students at the NIST institutions, the institutions we're supporting, have improved their retention rates by 6 points. But at those same institutions, the retention rates for Hispanic and Black students are up by 10 and almost 12 points. Not because we are putting distinct resources just for Black or Hispanic students, but as I've said, when you get the big issues right, when the systems are working better, then the students who will improve the most in their outcomes are going to be your most vulnerable populations. So I'll just close by saying not only thank you, but that you have more power than you may give yourself credit for. That when I was sitting head of student success programs 14 years ago at those dismal graduation rates and high equity gaps at Georgia State, I really felt that it was not in my power to create a different circumstance. So if there's any lesson you take away from my comments this morning, is that you have the ability to make transformative change, even without having the resources that you would most desire, even with having challenging students who may be challenged academically in their preparation and so forth, you can make a transformative difference. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn things over to the panel.
So to get the session underway, can I ask the panel to make their way up to the front? And while they're doing that, I'll perhaps introduce them. But before I do any of that, can I also begin by thanking Tim for his exhaustive and encyclopedic run-through the experience of Georgia State. For those of you who've not come across the example before, I think it's a very thorough example, a very thorough illustration of what one institution has been done with the correct sort of leadership. But we'll get into that in a moment, okay? So I've been joined on the panel, on the front, with a panel who will be responding to the comments from Tim a moment ago. To begin with, I've got sitting nearest me in the fetching pink outfit, jacket, Sonal Singh, who's from UTS. Her name has cropped up quite often. So I'm going to give you a synopsis of her biography. She's been over 15 years in higher education, and she's shaped sector-wide strategies and led transformative national research in regional and remote partnerships, refugee education, and culturally inclusive practice. She's been involved in a number of national priority pool projects and an Office for Learning and Teaching project on refugee pathways. There's a lot here, but I think most recently she was the recipient of the New South Wales Humanitarian Award for 2023. Sonal, you're very welcome to the panel. In addition, we have at the front here Nadine Zacharias, who's sat in the middle. Nadine, you'll perhaps know her, is the managing director and founder of a specialist consulting firm by the name of Equity by Design. She was previously in senior management roles in Swinburne and Deakin University and has a track record in research projects, thought leaderships, and is very much a sort of friend of ACSES. And then last but not least, at the far end of the panel, as I'm looking at it, we have Shaun Ewen, Professor Shaun Ewen. He's currently the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Education at Griffith University, having been there since the start of 2022, and previously a PVC for Place and Indigenous, and a foundation director of the Melbourne Posh Institute for Indigenous Health at the University of Melbourne. He also has a professorship as a visiting colleague at King's College London. I think we have that in common. And he has a background in physiotherapy, international studies, and a doctorate in education. So Tim, you're joined by an august panel who are going to be responding to what you've got to say and actually engaging in a Q&A with our audience this morning. Can I move over here and join you? Thank you. So to begin with, I wonder if we could just ask each member of the panel to share with us in 2 or 3 minutes sort of initial reactions to what they heard. They heard a lot, but perhaps just sort of get those initial thoughts across. Sonal, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it was an interesting insight, and we've heard, Tim present before. And I think one of the things that sort of stood out for me was the transformation is quite impressive. And the reason it is so impressive is because the question they asked was actually about how, not the question we always ask. The question that we often tend to ask is, how do we help students? But, George State University actually asked, how do we stop failing them, right? So instead of looking at students as at-risk students, the question and the challenge they had taken on board was at-risk systems. And that stood out, and that's quite impressive with that 70% increase in their graduation rates. And I think flipping that, where the focus is on the system and not on the student, they were able to sort of identify how do you design solutions based on that. And that sort of made me start to think about how, as a sector, we also need to be focusing on whether we are the problem, what are the challenges, and what are the barriers we are putting forward for the students. But at the same time, how do we ensure that we bring that culturally inclusive lens when we talk about utilizing AI, when we talk about designing our systems? Because the students that we have in our higher education sector often do get categorized on the equity groups because based on the equity funding, and we know funding drives behaviors. But if you talk to any practitioner, we do have students from Pacifica backgrounds, students from refugee backgrounds, K experience students as well, who need to get personalized support, who need targeted support, who need culturally safe spaces as well. And for that to be enabled, I think one of the things we need to also talk about is when you talk about AI at scale, it's how do you ensure that that scale takes into consideration the needs of all these priority groups as well in a culturally responsive manner. And that sort of was the thing that I was thinking when I saw that presentation.
Thank you, Sonal. I'm sure we'll come back to that. Nadine, you want to share your initial comments?
Sure, thank you. Tim, I had the pleasure to hear you speak before, but I think many colleagues in the room haven't. And the love hearts on your screens, the gasps and the comments in the audience, really showed how impressed people were by the systematic approach that you have taken. So I just wanted to play that back to you as well, that you have a new fan base in this room, judging by the comments while you were talking. To me, what is particularly impressive is that you're so clear about the definition of the problem. So you really grounded that in the evidence that you had, and it was in these attainment gaps, and the fact that they were unacceptable. And the fact, Tim, that you have a background in religious studies, only sort of brought that point out stronger, that there's a moral imperative for universities to set up the students we enroll for success and to make sure that we follow through on the promise that we're making to these students. Then the recognition that institutions have an outsized role in creating the problem, and that really powerful question of, are we the problem? And then the follow-up question of, how are we the problem? And to really dig into this. And then, you went systematically about solving this problem in a data-informed and really student-centered way that is not deficit-based, as Sonal said, that is very much strength-based, that centers the student, and really sort of walks through the university experience in their shoes and says, where do our students stumble and fall? And I find that deeply impressive. And then, of course, that cycle of analysing, piloting, evaluating, scaling. And Shaun can respond to this, but from my observation in Australian universities, we have problems at every point of that cycle. We have problems analysing, with data systems that don't match up, with spreadsheets in people's drawers, and we don't do the analysing super well. We don't do the pilot and evaluation bit well. Sometimes we pilot but don't evaluate, but often we don't even pilot. And then the scaling, and Tim, again, the final point I'm going to make, don't create a program, change the systems. So we have to change our BAU, we have to be more inclusive in what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so that, to me, is a really impressive bit of the Georgia State story.
Okay, that's good so far, Tim. Shaun, initial comments.
Thanks, Shamit. Thanks, Tim. I'll make one comment about data and then two other comments that I'll be interested in your reflections on, but also perhaps from the broader gathering as well if we get there. Just firstly on data, it's, as Nadine said, for most of our universities, I think you walk around and you always hear the quality of the data is a problem. How do we think about building AI on foundations that are a bit sloppy? And so we need to think about that as a foundational piece to fix. And I've been increasingly thinking about that as the cost of a new building. So $50, $100 million for a fancy new building. And I think some of the data people in our room would be pretty happy with $50 or $100 million in fixing up our data, either across the sector or for our institutions that we can actually build on. That's a basic problem that we have. But I'm not as interested in data, and I know that was your presentation, but you made two other points that I kind of want to call out. You said that you went to 80% non-white students. And I'm really interested for your and your team's insights into what that means, because Indigenous, historically marginalised students then stop being the other. Mattering and belonging changes for them, and I would be interested to understand how that changes their sense of belonging and being a part of the university project. I was talking to a Vice-Chancellor from Queensland on the weekend actually, and she was sharing with me, therefore it wasn't Simon, she was sharing with me that when they opened up their Foundation and Pathways program that was initially for international students to domestic students, the Indigenous students that participated in that actually said, this is different, it's not a white space. And their success improved, their engagement improved, their sense of belonging. So I'm really interested in unpacking that a little further. The other one, students at 1 a.m., with respect to all of my colleagues in the room, I reckon, see these glasses I can't see from a distance or close, so I can say this, lots of us did our undergraduate degree last century. How do we get students as part of solving the problems that we know that actually they want to talk to us at 1 a.m.? And perhaps in 1980 something, that wasn't something that was even on the table. So students as co-creating this experience and co-creating the solutions, whether they're data or other, are a really important part of the conversation.
Thank you, Shaun. So look, the way we're going to run this, we're going to get some questions from the audience to Tim, but also to the panel, and I'm going to try to moderate this as lightly as possible. But Tim, could we perhaps begin with Shaun's question back to you about how this switches the position of minority students so they essentially no longer in the other position, other status?
Yeah, I think it's a very astute observation, and I do think there's some evidence that what you're suspecting happened at Georgia State in fact did. But I want to offer one caveat, which is the 80% of our students who self-identify as non-white are a varied group. And there is, in fact, no majority group any longer. Our Hispanic students, our Asian students, our Native American students, these are all minoritized groups. And so it's not that the students, have now kind of reversed what was often the white-dominated culture on American campuses. But I think what they do experience is that they can find a community and find a group that is more open to whatever differences that they may bring to the table. And I think there is an openness that comes from that. One of the studies that was done of Georgia State a couple years ago at the national level was, it turns out that our dormitories, our housing, our university housing is much more integrated than at most American universities, where students tend to kind of find their own group and room with students from their own racial background. And when the analysis was done, what they found is that in the first year at Georgia State, students are so much exposed and so regularly exposed to students who are from different backgrounds than their own that they formulate these friendships. And by their second year, they're rooming and housing with individuals who are very different from maybe their own background. So, I think that is a promising characteristic of the movement that is happening in many universities to diversify in a significant way. It does provide opportunities to establish richer communities for the students.
Thank you for that. Look, I'm just going to start going through some of the questions from the audience here, and I'll pull in the panel, particularly if you want to jump in as well, okay? So there's a whole range sort of piled up here, but in particular, let's get one. Ben Archer asked, it's a much more granular question, which was there much of a challenge of getting buy-in, he asks, particularly in terms of training your team to discuss this data with students? So how do you go about that buy-in process? Can you describe a little bit of that for us?
Yeah, I'll start, and hopefully the panel can join in with some of their experiences. It was much harder getting buy-in from our faculty and staff than from the students, right? The students, you think, okay, are they going to adapt to, an AI coach? At the time in 2016, AI was much less familiar. And within weeks, they're by the tens of thousands using it and asking questions at 1 a.m. and so forth. They love the use of analytics. What they appreciate is that it treats them as adults. We've heard this in a number of instances, to sit down with a student who's a political science major who just got a C in their first course in political science and say, okay, here are some of the challenges, because Students who, get C grades in their first class don't tend to do well. So here are your options. The students appreciate that they're treated as adults and respected. The faculty and staff were slower to buy in. We heard a number of objections. I quickly mentioned one about the analytics kind of pushing students into easier courses and easier majors. We have been sensitive to the use of AI with regard to how it may be reflected upon a number of our more vulnerable students. Every time, we've now run 5 randomized control trials using our AI coaching as the model and employing independent evaluators. Every one of those randomized control trials, and we published them all, they're on the Institute website, shows that the strongest benefits for the AI tool are for students from underserved backgrounds. So we haven't seen that the use of the technology is disadvantaging students from underserved groups. Just the opposite. It's providing them outlets and answers and support that they didn't have before. One last thing I'll mention, though, is when we're talking about AI, we have programmed trigger words in the AI platform. So if a student mentions being depressed, being discouraged, harming themselves, harming somebody else, and so forth, that question does not get answered by the AI. It immediately gets delivered to somebody in our Dean of Students office who is manning those lines 24/7. We have been able to identify some students in crisis who hadn't gone to family members, hadn't gone to our counseling center, but actually say something to the AI coach that indicates that they may be in distress and needing support.
Does a member of the panel want to come back on the obstacles, student buy-in versus staff buy-in? That was the high-level point that Tim raised.
I'm happy
Nadine?
to talk to help seeking, because we know that is, like a key issue for equity students. Students who come through a private school pathway are much more used to help seeking and have a bit of an expectation that there's people in the institution that can help them out if they change, face challenges. Students who didn't go through a private school recently tend not to do that. So we know that, again, that service use has strong correlation with retention rates, but only 60% of students, use any service. So what are we going to do about the 40% that never engage with the service system, and they're only the students who are still there, right? So that doesn't include any students who we've lost previously. So I think flipping it, and enabling a self-service option for students is incredibly smart. Again, from the student point of view, very accessible, very easy to engage with, a technology that they're very used to in other aspects of their lives. And it also, again, it's scalable, it's very low cost and efficient. So you're getting to new students that you previously probably wouldn't have engaged with. So yes,
Yeah.
thumbs up.
I mean, at UTS as well, we've been trialing some of the chatbots to provide the support to the students. And we noticed it's often students who are using them, like it was mentioned by Tim, students that have work responsibilities, caring responsibilities. They don't have a time to go and talk to somebody in person. They're utilizing this. So there was an increase in the engagement. Pushback, I think, is more, the pushback comes from a place of care, concern. Are we utilizing it well? Have we got ethical safeguards in place? If we are using any predictive modeling, we know there's biases built in around that as well. So what are our ethical safeguards around it? So as an institution, one of the things we've done is we've got an AI advisory board. If any faculty, any staff wants to roll out anything, it goes through some checks and balances. It needs to demonstrate it has been piloted, what has been the feedback of that, and then what as a AI governance board we need to factor in terms of risk mitigation as well when we roll that out as well. So that does give assurance to staff and especially our academic colleagues as well, regarding the responsible use of rollout of these tools for students, because at the end of the day, it is meant to support the students as well. And I think it often comes from a place of care and concern for the students.
Thank you. So Sally Kift and Matt Brett both asked something very similar. Let's look at Sally's version of this. She asked, what, if any, does the role of the curriculum redesign play in your approach? Tim, you want to respond?
Yeah, I'm happy to start here. It has been transformative. That when we started tracking 800 different risk factors for every student every day, and by the way, to Sonal's point, we don't include any racial, economic, or ethnic demographics in our predictive analytics. They're based purely on what kind of academic performance factors may predict a student who's going to struggle. When we began doing that systematically, we found that there were a lot of individual instances where we could help students. As a pre-med student who's struggling in their first chemistry class, we can reach out and help that student. But we also found some systematic issues with the way we design our academic programs. And when, for instance, we launched these predictive analytics now 13 years ago, we started getting in the first couple weeks of the semester hundreds of alerts for students who were in our microeconomics course. This was is a very popular course. We have a big business school, and students are required to take that early in their academic programs. And when we analyzed it, it indicated that the issue was not individual students, it was the way that course was constructed and how the early modules in that course were being delivered and so forth. And the faculty went back and redesigned the course as a result of that. We've had our business degree redesigned as far as course sequencing is concerned. We've had our pre-nursing program move from a 2-year program to a 1-year program because the analytics revealed things that we hadn't observed in the past. One of the things that we found with some of these pre-programs where students have to take multiple modules or courses in order to qualify to be able to advance in the academic program is that these were quite harsh and produced poor results for low-income students, because many of these students who didn't succeed within the pre-program were exhausting their financial resources and didn't have remaining resources to allow them to complete a secondary program if they had to move to it. And so we've redesigned all of our pre-academic programs to be more streamlined so they produce more equitable results for our low-income students. All of that came out of this analysis and this understanding that there are analytic implications for things like the prerequisites, the course sequencing, and other things that we take for granted in many academic programs.
Shaun, do you want to come in? Yeah.
To your closing comment of your presentation, Tim, you said that we can get on with this without great cost. And there's an example that you've just described that I agree with. There's a couple that I don't, but that's all right. You don't need in-depth analytics to work out what courses, programs, subjects, whatever word we're using, has the highest rate of retention issues. And you don't need great insights to know, at the moment at least, that boys, young men doing science is likely to lead to some retention problems. And so we took a model, we borrowed from Auckland actually, I'm sure many of you are doing it as well, as is called a High Impact 20. What are the 20 subjects, courses, that if we turn the dial on retention for those courses would actually change significantly the university data on retention? So taking a subject approach, and we're not through that program, and it'll be a rolling program of work, but my point is twofold. One is to support your approach in terms of pick a subject that's going to impact and change that, and a holistic approach to that. What's the curriculum quality like? What's the teaching quality like? How's the timetabling, and so on? They're all large first-year courses, by the way. And secondly, you don't need great data insights to pick what those courses are. That's pretty simple for all of us to have a look at. So that's already showing some good results for us in terms of uptick on those courses and impacting the overall retention approach for the university.
I agree with Shaun completely. And let me offer one other practical thing that doesn't take advanced data. One thing we're doing with all our partner campuses across the institute I direct is not merely looking at which significant first-year courses have high non-pass rates or the bottlenecks that are preventing students from progressing, but most of these courses have multiple sections offered any given academic year. In some cases at American universities, there are 30 sections of the same course offered every semester. And so we're looking at the non-pass rates across sections of the same course to see, are there any things we can identify as problems that can be corrected? Is it that the courses offered via a certain modality have higher non-pass rates, a certain time of day? Or yes, is it particular instructors that are less effective at teaching the course? When we first say that to American audiences at universities, sometimes they recoil, well, we can't call out our colleagues for not being as effective in the classroom. But my view, and it is a moral view, is we owe it to the students. If your chance of passing a significant module or course is twice more difficult because of the luck of the draw and the instructor you get, then we as institutional leaders need to do something to correct that, to make it fair and equitable. It's another kind of application of equity here. It should be equitable regardless of what section the student ends up in, and it's our duty to ensure that.
Okay, let's move on, Tim. I've got a question here from Peter Bentley, and he says, Georgia State University is a research-intensive university. Therefore, does the strong research expenditure complement or hinder or have no impact on its equity agenda? Thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say with some pride, because I do have a research portfolio myself, that Georgia State is one of the fastest improving universities in the U.S. as far as research agenda and dollars that we're bringing in and so forth. So that is important. I think it's always a plus. I think it provides students with opportunities that they wouldn't have if we didn't have these research projects going on. We've got undergraduate research and assistantships in many, many programs. My institute has probably a dozen students who we support through grants that can work with us on a regular basis. But the other advantage is it creates the environment where we could treat the problem that I've been describing to you this morning as a research problem. And it really is. How are we complicit in the attrition of our students? That is a research question. And if we can understand it in greater detail, that's where the opportunity for positive change comes. Georgia State was ranked very high as the most innovative or the second most innovative university throughout a lot of the last decade. And some people ask me, well, what did you do to come up with innovative ideas? And my point, and it's sincere, is we never tried to be innovative, right? If there's a solution out there off the shelf that we could apply and help our students by saying, we'll borrow it, it's tried and true, we would have done that in a flash. Where we came up with innovations is when we did this analysis, when we understood we were complicit in creating a problem for our students, and there wasn't a ready-made solution. So we went to AI chatbot to help students as they onboard to the university. We went to that microgrant program that with no application required to intervene with students before they stop out for financial reasons, because there were not solutions in that particular area.
Panel, I mean, the relationship between a research agenda and an equity agenda. Thoughts?
Thanks, Peter. It changes the conversation, actually. And again, one of Tim's slides showed the financial impact of retaining students. And in a fiscally constrained environment for at least many of us, it changes the conversation with the DVCR about priorities. And also to Tim's point about a moral imperative to ensure good teaching, we've got some fabulous metrics which we hold researchers to account for. How do we think about some of these metrics around retention and success that we hold teachers and academic teaching staff to account for as well? So it's a tension, and I think it's different for each institution that has different priorities, but it does change the conversation when you have these kind of insights into impact and student retention.
Anyone else, quickly?
I would have made the same point, and sort of something that is not a fully formed thought, but more a question and potentially back to the audience and potentially to Tim. But it's, as our high reliance on international student revenue for research is waning, maybe we need to look at our, domestic teaching revenue again in a slightly different light and revalue the money that is coming in that way. But a question more than a formed opinion.
Yeah, I think the only thing out sort of caution is also, student equity or equity in general should not be a side project. We tend to often lean on levers that we can find, and which is good. As practitioners, we need to at times do that. But I think it is also about making sure that equity is an operating principle, full stop, for universities.
Okay, right. So can I just abuse the role of the chair and just ask a question myself? So Tim is describing a story, a 20-year turnaround story of what one university did all by itself, all right? And it's quite a compelling story. There's in the background, there's no equivalent of a ATEC commission breathing down the neck of a university or a minister saying student equity must be better than it was in the past. They've done this all by themselves for all sorts of very interesting, compelling reasons. And yet here we are, I suppose, in the middle of a reform era, when all these sort of external forces are sort of gathering. Universities are being encouraged and maybe compelled to raise their game. And that's where it's come to. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, this does not involve the federal government, well, maybe not this current federal government in the United States, but the federal government breathing down the neck of universities, all by themselves. Shaun?
I'm pleased that you called out the 20 years because this is a project of persistence, but I'd suggest that we're not just starting. And I happen to be reading some stuff, sorry Sally, but you might have written it, but Sally Kift, Richard James and so on have been writing about how we do this better for a long time. We're now getting on the bandwagon of, well, our data's pretty unfortunate, and how do we do better in the AI space? But there's some foundations of curriculum, transition pedagogy, support for students, driving equity agendas that is not new. And there's a lot that we know that we haven't actioned, and I think there's a lot of hygiene activities that can still be undertaken, and whether that's because we've been prioritising a research agenda or not, I don't know. But I think this is a long game that we're a part of, and that there's a lot that we probably haven't actually taken on the research that's already been done.
I would say similar things. Like, this is a long-term process, and if it was easy, guess what? We would have done it, right? This is, nobody's disagreeing with what the agenda is. You know, we have a fair sense of what some of the problems are. There's institutional leaders who are doing this, and I think calling out Tim's leadership in this, you know, like the fact that this institution had sustained leadership, commitment, enthusiasm, vision for this project matters. You know, the fact that you have like a 10-year runway and you allow yourself to go back and drill deeper and have another look at the same problem, that matters. You know, like, this is not a one big attempt. Like, this is iterative, and we get better as we're doing it and as we're building the system and building people's capability and building the buy-in and getting the aha moments from all the colleagues in the rooms up and down their organizational hierarchy. I think that's what this is, and that's what Tim spoke to. And so, yeah, if the ATEC can encourage this, you know, like, and enable that kind of institutional change agenda, amazing. But if it's trying to micromanage an institutional change agenda, that might be a bit more difficult. And I really applaud, you know, like, the leaders who are here, Shaun and David and other DVCs who are here today, right? Like, that is the first step. Like, that is the kind of leadership that we need to move this agenda along. And I think ATEC has a critical role in how they're going to play that. You know, do they come from, you know, underneath the leaders and lift them up and enable them, or do they come from the top and tell us what to do? I mean, that will matter.
I think, you know, there were programs before HEP, there will be programs after HEP. You know, we used to have consortiums before, there's consortiums now, and it will exist in all sort of shape, you know, and that's, I think, because of a representation of what Australia is all about, you know. It is a country that is a multicultural community, it is a country that cares for each other, it is a country that makes sure that no one is left behind. I think the frustration that would probably be is that the progress tends to be slow in certain times, there's many challenges that comes through. I often say to my team, I mean, that's the fun of it though. Right? We need to actually enjoy what we are doing, because the work that we are doing makes a difference, right? And we might not be here to see the impact of that, but every progress sort of makes a difference. I mean, last night here at dinner, we got to see the early career practitioners that were awarded last year at EFIA. I mean, they will carry that pattern forward for us. So I think we just need to be optimistic and have that hope. I think that probably hope is the discipline that we need when it comes to equity as well.
Thank you, Sonal. So I'm going to have to wind this up, and with apologies to others who put questions down. Look, Tim, can I just say on behalf of the panel, the audience, of course, thank you very much for the inspiring and uplifting talk that you gave us. I mean, you catch Australia in the middle of this era of reform. I mean, that can't have been lost upon you when you're formulating your thoughts. And I think there are some, it's great to hear this, but it raises many questions about the pace and nature of reform that we're going to have here in Australia, given the government is determined to get universities to raise their game. The question then becomes, you know, will it be external pressure or will it come from within? I think Nadine put it very nicely a moment ago. So it's a work in progress. We very much welcome your input from the outside, but I'm sure we'll carry on speaking to you and your colleagues in the US as part of this. So can I just, on behalf of everyone, thank Tim and thank the panel.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being with you this morning.